So, hello and welcome back yet again to another evening with Mr. Charles Dickens as we read another chapter of A Tale of Two Cities, which is picking up in interest, definitely. This is probably going to be another slightly shorter chapter, probably just shy of the 30-minute mark. But never fear, because the next one is going to be another one of those slightly longer chapters. I figure it's all swings and roundabouts. It evens out in the end. Also, on the weather front, we had a much nicer day. I got out, took a walk, enjoyed it, definitely enjoyed it, especially because the next 2 days are not supposed to be good. It's Early spring is such an interesting season because we'll have a day like today where it was sunny, it was almost warm, it was like 38 or 40 degrees, beautiful. A little nippy with the wind. The wind was a little bit chilly, but overall, beautiful day. And tomorrow is also supposed to be warm, but it's supposed to rain all day, which is supposed to then transition into freezing rain overnight tomorrow night, which is then supposed to transition into heavy wet snow. So fingers crossed, knock on wood, everybody, that we don't lose power, because we're also supposed to have loads of wind. Springtime weather. It's always interesting. We'll go with interesting. It's always interesting, the weather in the spring. So hopefully it won't be too bad. And hopefully my little raccoon friends who have woken up from their winter's slumber won't be too upset by a bunch of icky, wet snow yuck. We'll see. If you didn't see, I actually put up a short this morning of the raccoons because I looked out and I was like, it's not totally dark. I can probably film them. So they're cute. I like raccoons. But there are no raccoons in Charles Dickens's world, so that is what we are going to do now. We are going to jump back into A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens in Book 2, The Golden Thread, which turns out to be Miss Manette, and Chapter 5, which is titled The Jackal. Those were drinking days, and most men drank hard. So very great is the improvement time has brought about in such habits that a moderate statement of the quantity of wine and punch which one man would swallow in the course of a night, without any detriment to his reputation as a gentleman, would seem in these days to be a ridiculous exaggeration. The learned profession of the law was certainly not behind any other learned profession in its bacchanalian propensities, and neither was Mr. Stryver, already fast shouldering his way to a large and lucrative practice, behind his competitors in this particular, any more than in any of the drier parts of the legal race. A favourite at the Old Bailey and eke the sessions, Mr. Stryver had begun cautiously to hew away the lower staves of the ladder on which he mounted. Sessions and Old Bailey had now to summon their favourite specially to their longing arms, and shouldering itself towards the visage of the Lord Chief Justice in the Court of the King's Bench, the florid countenance of Mr. Stryver might be daily seen busting out of the bed of wigs like a great sunflower pushing its way at the sun from amongst a rank garden full of flaring companions. It had once been noticed at the bar that while Mr. Stryver was a glib man, and an unscrupulous, and a ready, and a bold, He had not the faculty of extracting the essence from a heap of statements, which is among the most striking and necessary of the advocate's accomplishments. But a remarkable improvement came upon him as to this. The more business he got, the greater his power seemed to grow of getting at its pith and marrow, and however late at night he sat carousing with Sidney Carton, he always had his points at his fingers in every single morning. Sidney Carton, the idlest and most unpromising of men, was Stryver's greatest ally. What the two drank together, between Hilary Term and Michaelmas, might have floated a king's ship. Stryver never had a case in hand anywhere, but Carton was there, with his hands in his pockets, staring at the ceiling of the court. They went the same circuit, and even there they prolonged their usual orgies late into the night, and Carton was rumored to be seen at broad day going home stealthily and unsteadily to his lodgings like a dissipated cat. At last it began to get about, among such as were interested in the matter, that although Sidney Carton would never be a lion, he was an amazingly good jackal, and that he rendered suit and service to Mr. Stryver in that humble capacity. 10 o'clock, sir, said the man at the tavern, whom he had charged to wake him. 10 o'clock, sir. What's the matter? 10 o'clock, sir. What do you mean? 10 o'clock at night? Yes, sir. Your honor told me to call you. Oh, I remember. Very well, very well. After a few dull efforts to get to sleep again, which the man dexterously combated by stirring the fire continuously for 5 minutes, he got up, tossed his hat on, and walked out. He turned into the temple, and having revived himself by twice pacing the pavements of the King's Bench Walk and Paper Buildings, turned into the Stryver chambers. The Stryver clerk, who never assisted during these conferences, had gone home, and the Stryver principal opened the door. He had his slippers on, and a loose bedgown, and his throat was bare for greater ease. He had that rather wild, strained, seared marking around the eyes which might be observed in all free livers of his class, from the portrait of Jeffreys on down, and which can be traced under the various disguises of art through the portraits of every drinking age. You're a little late, Memory, said Stryver. About the usual time. Maybe a quarter of an hour later. And they went into a dingy room, lined with books and littered with papers, where there was a blazing fire. A kettle steamed upon the hob, and in the midst of the wreck of papers, a table shone with plenty of wine upon it, and brandy, and rum, and sugar and lemons. You've had your bottle, I perceive, Sidney. 2 tonight, I think. I'd been dining with the day client, or watching him dine. That was a rare point, Sidney, that you brought to bear upon the identification. How did you come by it? When did it strike you? I thought he was a rather handsome fellow, and I thought I should have been much the same sort of fellow if I had had any luck. At this, Mr. Stryver laughed until he shook his pernicious paunch. You and your luck, Sidney. Get to work. Get to work. Sullenly enough, the Jackal loosed his dress and went into an adjoining room and came back with a large jug of cold water, a basin, and a towel or two. Steeping the towels in the water and partially wringing them out, he folded them on his head in a manner that was hideous to behold, sat down at the table, and said, "I'm ready." "Not much boiling down to be done tonight, Memory," said Mr. Strively gaily as he looked amongst the papers. "Oh, yeah? How much?" "Only 2 sets." "Well, give me the worst one first." "There they are, Sidney. Fire away." The lion then composed himself on his back on a sofa off to one side of the drinking table, while the jackal sat down at his own paper-bestrewn table on the other side, with the bottles and glasses ready to hand. Both of them resorted to the drinking table without stint, but each in a very different way. The lion, for the most part, reclining with his hands in his waistband, looking at the fire, or occasionally flirting with some light document, and the jackal, with knitted brow and intent face, so deep in his task that his eyes did not even follow the hand he stretched out for his glass, which caused him often to grope about for a minute or more before finding the glass for his lips. 2 or 3 times the matter in hand became so knotty that the jackal found it imperative upon him to get up, steep his towels anew. From these pilgrimages to the jug and basin, he returned with such eccentricities of damp headgear as no words can even begin to describe, which were made even the more ludicrous by his anxious gravity. After a while, the jackal had got together a compact repast for the lion and proceeded to offer it to him. The lion took it with care and caution, made his selections and his remarks upon it, and the jackal assisted both. When it had been fully discussed, the lion put his hands back into his waistband and lay down to meditate. And then the jackal invigorated himself with a bumper for his throttle and a fresh application to his head, and applied himself to the collection of the second meal. This was administered to the lion in the same manner, and was not disposed of until the clocks struck 3 o'clock in the morning. "And now we've done, Sidney. Fill a bumper of punch," said Mr. Stryver. The jackal removed the towels from his head, which had been steaming again, shook himself, yawned, shivered, and complied. "You were very sound, Sidney, in the matter of those Crown witnesses today. Every question told." "I'm always sound, am I not?" "I don't gainsay that. What's roughened your temper? Put some punch onto it and smooth it out again." With a grunt, the jackal again complied. "The old Sidney Carton, of old Shrewsbury school," said Stryver, nodding his head over him as he reviewed him in the present and past. "The old seesaw Sidney. Up one minute and down the next, now in spirits and now despondent." "Humph," said the other, which must mean yes. The same Sidney with the same luck. Even then I did exercises for other boys, and very rarely my own." "So why not?" "God only knows. It was my way, I suppose." He sat, hands in his pockets and legs stretched out before him, gazing at the fire. "Carton," said Stryver, squaring himself at him with a bullying air, as if the fire grate had been the furnace in which sustained endeavor was forged, and the one delicate thing to be done for the old Sidney Carton of old Shrewsbury school was to shoulder him into it. "Your way was, and always has been, a lame way. You summon no energy and purpose. Now look at me." Botheration, said Sidney, with a lighter and more good-natured laugh. Don't you be moral. How have I done what I have done, said Stryver. How do I do what I do? Mostly by paying me to help you, I suppose. But it's not worth your whole while to berate me or the air about it. What you want to do, you do. You are always in the front rank, and I've always been behind. Well, I had to get to the front rank. I wasn't born there, was I? I wasn't present at that ceremony, but my opinion is that you were, Carton said. And at this he laughed again, and then they both laughed. Before Shrewsbury, and at Shrewsbury, and ever since Shrewsbury, said Carton, you have fallen into your rank, and I've fallen into mine. Even when we were fellow students in the Quartier Latin, picking up French and French law and other French crumbs that we didn't get much good out of, you were always somewhere, and I've just always been nowhere. And whose fault is that? Well, upon my soul, I am not sure that it was not yours. You were always driving and riving and shouldering and pressing to that restless degree that I had no chance for my life but to rust and repose. It's a gloomy thing, though, to talk about one's own past with the day breaking. Turn me in some other direction before I go. Well, then, pledge me to the pretty witness, said Stryver, holding up a glass. Did that turn you in a pleasant direction? Apparently not, for Carton became gloomy again. Pretty witness, he muttered, looking down into his glass. I have had enough of witnesses today and tonight. Who's your pretty witness? Why, the picturesque doctor's daughter, Miss Manette. She? Pretty? Is she not? No. Why, man alive, she was the admiration of the whole court. Rot the admiration of the whole court. Who made the Old Bailey a judge of beauty? She was just a golden-haired doll. Do you know, Sidney, said Mr. Stryver, looking at him with sharp eyes and slowly drawing a hand across his florid face. Do you know, I rather thought at the time that you sympathized with the golden hair doll and were quick to see what happened to her. Quick to see what happened? If a girl, doll or no doll, swoons within a yard or two of a man's nose, he can see it without a perspective glass. I pledge you, but I deny her beauty. And now I'll have no more drink. I'm going to bed. When his host followed him out onto the staircase with a candle to light him down the stairs, the day was coldly looking in through its grimy windows. When he got out of the house, the air was cold and sad, the dull sky overcast, the river dark and dim, the whole scene like a lifeless desert. And wreaths of dust were spinning round and round before the morning blast, as if the desert sand had risen far away, and the first spray of it in its advance had begun the overwhelming of the city. Waste forces within him, and a desert all around, this man stood still on his way across a silent terrace, and saw for a moment, lying in that wilderness before him, a mirage of honorable ambition, self-denial, and perseverance. In the fair city of this vision, there were airy galleries from which the loves and graces looked upon him, gardens in which the fruits of life hung ripening, waters of hope that sparkled in his sight. Just for a moment, and then it was gone. Climbing to a high chamber in a well of houses, he threw himself down on his clothes in a neglected bed, and its pillow was wet with wasted tears. Sadly, sadly the sun rose, and it rose upon no sadder sight than a man of good ability and good emotion, incapable of their directed exercise, incapable of his own help and his own happiness, aware of the blight on him and resigning himself to let it eat him away. And that is the end of chapter 5, with the very sad story of Sidney Carton, the doppelganger of Charles Darnay, who seems to have a very depressing life. He seems to be doing all the work for the lawyer who got off Darnay and getting none of the credit for it. And we already know from chapter 4 that he was very impressed by Miss Manette. I think he is protesting a bit too much. That was an interesting chapter. It was a little bit easy to get lost in with the whole lion and jackal thing. I think maybe Dickens took that allegory a bit too far, but that's probably a me thing. But overall, I really liked that chapter. It was a lot more of a character study of both Stryver and Mr. Sidney Carton, who I do have to remember is Sidney Carton and not Carlton. I have a terrible habit of adding letters to words. It's something that I am aware of, and I do try to break myself of it, but it's really hard. And I don't know why I do it. But if you will forgive me for it, I will beg your pardon for it. And that is where we are going to leave it tonight. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile. We have a much longer chapter tomorrow, so look forward to that one, and I will see you then.